Last week, we saw Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley, Saquon Barkley, Tank Dell, Brandon Ayuk, and Brock Purdy go off in fantasy football and help people win their matchups. In today's video, I am bringing you 10 names that will do the same in week 12. 10 players that will absolutely dominate fantasy football this week. If you have these guys, get ready for a fantastic week. If you're playing them, I'm sorry, it might not be your best ever week in fantasy football. Hopefully you guys are not in too big of a food coma after Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. Hopefully you had a fantastic day with your family. Tell me the best Thanksgiving food in the comments. I want to know right now. But let's go ahead and get to the video. The first player that I believe is going to dominate here in week 12, that is Rashad White at the Indianapolis Colts. It is time to put some respect on Rashad White's name for fantasy football. He is the RB6 on the year in a PPR format. And since week 7, he's actually the RB3 in fantasy, averaging 19.5 PPR points per game. Yes, he might not be the most efficient runner. In fact, he's probably one of the least efficient runners in the NFL, but that doesn't matter. We want our fantasy points, and that's not how he scores fantasy points. He gets his points through the air. Only Alvin Kamara has more targets in that time span since week 7. The guy is getting targeted consistently week in and week out. And now he gets to play the Indianapolis Colts, who in 2023 allow the 8th most rushing yards per game, almost 130 rushing yards per game allowed by that defense, the 7th most points per game to opposing offenses, almost 25 points per game, and the 5th most fantasy points allowed to the running back position when you adjust for schedule. They're allowing almost 26.5 PPR points per game to the running back position. Start Rashad White with a ton of confidence this week. The number 2 player here that I believe is going to dominate. He's maybe the oldest player in the top 24 at his position. That is Adam Thielen at the Tennessee Titans. Thielen is due for a big game after a disappointing kind of run here from weeks 8 to 11. Let's not forget that he was the wide receiver 3 in fantasy in the first 6 weeks of the season. It's not been good, as good at least lately, but the good news is he's still seeing a ridiculous amount of targets since the bye week at 9.5 targets per game. The play calling duties have kind of shuffled around to a couple different names. Now it's back with Frank Reich. You know he's going to be targeting, or at least scheming up, Adam Thielen a ton of targets. And clearly this is Bryce's preferred target within the offense. This is going to pay dividends for you guys. I 100% believe that with the right matchup. And this is that matchup that you want to exploit against the Tennessee Titans in 2023. They give up the 13th most passing yards per game, and more importantly, the 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, almost actually right at 40 PPR points per game. So think about it. How is that pie going to be split in Carolina? 40 potential points? Even if we get, let's say, 20 from Adam Thielen, we'll be very, very happy. All right, this takes me to my spicy, hot, bold take of the week. Y'all ready for this? Let's get a little bold. He took over the fantasy world. He took it by storm in the first 6 weeks of the season. Can you think about who this is? But after week 6, he went on IR with an injury. We've been waiting on him patiently ever since. I've been waiting on him in my home league patiently ever since. And I am starting him with confidence. His first week back from injury. In week 12, Kyon Williams will score over 17 PPR points versus the Arizona Cardinals in his return from injury. This is a great matchup versus the Cardinals. We all know this, but friendly reminder firstly that in the first 6 weeks, Kyon Williams was the RB4 in fantasy football, averaging 18.5 PPR points per game. If that doesn't get you excited, maybe this will. Keep in mind, what if I told you Kyon is averaging more PPR points this year than Ken Walker, than Austin Eckler, than David Montgomery, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Brian Robinson, Breece Hall, Ramondre Stevenson, Rashad White, and Jahmyr Gibbs. He is averaging more PPR points per game this year than any of those names. And now he gets to play that sweet matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. In 2023, they allowed the 7th most rushing yards per game, the 6th most points per game to opposing offenses, and the 2nd most points per game to fantasy running backs. When you adjust for schedule, they're giving up almost 30 PPR points per game. Kyon Williams absolutely can go straight back into your lineup with confidence. This team released Darrell Henderson as soon as he was available. That indicates to me that he's going to get most of the carries, most of the work like he used to. Kyon Williams, that is. So I'm starting him with the utmost confidence. Let me know if you guys are in the comments below. Okay, my 4th start of the week, we will talk about a quarterback, my favorite streaming option. In fact, he's better than a streaming option. That is Josh Dobbs versus the Chicago Bears on Monday Night Football. Since joining the Minnesota Vikings, guys, what I'm about to tell you, it sounds fake. It sounds like I'm making up these numbers. They're just genuine facts, not opinions, just facts. Since joining the Minnesota Vikings, Josh Dobbs has been a fantasy superstar. We know this, but did you know that as a Viking, Dobbs is averaging 22.5 fantasy points per game in a 4-point passing touchdown format? In that span, as a Viking, he is the quarterback 3 in fantasy football. Only 2 guys have been more valuable than him. As a Viking, Josh Dobbs is averaging more fantasy points than Justin Herbert, than Dak Prescott, than Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Lamar Jackson, and Tua Tagovailoa. Actually, like I mentioned, only 2 quarterbacks are averaging more points per game in that time span than Josh Dobbs. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. That's it. I expect this Linsanity streak, if you will, to continue this Monday night versus the Bears. The Bears in 2023 give up the 7th most passing yards per game, the 4th most points per game to opposing offenses, and the 13th most fantasy points per game at almost 17 a clip. With what Josh Dobbs can do on the ground, he is a threat to be a top 5 quarterback any given week, and we're rocking with him on Monday Night Football. What about you? All right, the 5th player that I believe is going to dominate, Evan Ingram at the Houston Texans. We have really not seen a true boom game for Evan Ingram so far this year. It's been okay. It's not been great, but it's been okay. Check this out. This is probably sad for the Ingram owners, but no other tight end has more targets without a touchdown than Evan Ingram this year. The good news is I've got great news. I believe that all changes this week. The Texans are the perfect matchup for your tight end to go ahead and blow up and have a huge fantasy day. In 2023, they give up the 8th most passing yards per game. And more importantly, there is not a better matchup for your tight end in fantasy than the Houston Texans. The most fantasy points to tight ends per game, almost 18 PPR points per game. Start Evan Ingram with a lot of confidence. All right, the next guy might be obvious, but if you own this player, it's been really rough for the last couple of weeks. But this is a bounce back opportunity. Stefan Diggs at the Philadelphia Eagles. Every superstar wide receiver is more than deserving of a night off, a bad day here and there. But we are in the middle of a 2-game stretch where Diggs, for fantasy, has been truly awful. He's averaging 6 PPR points in the last 2 weeks. That is really rough. Guys, guess when I traded? Guess when I traded for Stefan Diggs in my home league? Guess. 2 weeks ago. So since I have traded for Stefan Diggs, I'm getting less than 7 points per game. But the good news is, I feel your pain. I know where you're coming from. And this is the week that he is going to bounce back. The Bills face the Eagles in Philadelphia and will likely be forced to attack this secondary, as most teams, I know the Chiefs were able to last week, but most teams have not been able to run on them. Philadelphia in 2023 giving up the 5th most passing yards per game and the 2nd most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. Guys, allowing over 45 PPR points to fantasy wide receivers. If Diggs can't get it done this week, it's time to really start asking some questions, but I believe the skid stops here. All right, the 7th player that's going to dominate, Jerome Ford at the Denver Broncos. He's averaging over 20 total touches per game in the last 3 weeks. There was a little bit of a battle there while Jerome was injured between him and Kareem Hunt, who was going to get most of the touches. But since he's been healthy, he has taken over the reins of that backfield. And this should be a great matchup for him to capitalize in. In fact, maybe the best matchup for a running back. The Broncos defense, it really has picked up against the pass. But as far as against the run, they have not improved one bit. They are still, I would say, the worst rushing defense in the NFL. In 2023, they give up the most rushing yards per game. Guys, they are allowing 160 rushing yards per game. They have given up the highest yards per rush to opposing running backs at 5.5 yards per rush. They give up the third most points per game to opposing offenses, and no one gives up more fantasy points per game at 34.5 PPR points per game. The Broncos are the only team in the NFL to allow over 30 PPR points per game to the position, and the only team giving up more than 140 rushing yards per game. Keep in mind, the same defense, guys, that last week made Alexander Mattison and Ty Chandler look like absolute superstars. Jerome Ford is going to get the job done for you here in week 12. All right, the 8th player we're going to talk about, Tank Dell, is on a tear, and it continues this week versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. He is truly looking like a league winner in the last 3 weeks. Check this out. In the last 3 weeks, he is third in targets amongst wide receivers, averaging almost 12 a game, which is a ridiculous number. His yards, receiving yards, fourth amongst wide receivers, over 106 per game. No one in the last 3 weeks at the wide receiver spot has more touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, 4 total in the last 3 games. In fantasy points, he's a wide receiver 3 in that span, and he is a wide receiver 4 on a per game basis. He and CJ Stroud, they're just on another level right now. That combo, that 1-2, maybe CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott are the only guys who are kind of above that stack at this very moment. And now he gets to play the Jags, Tank Dell that is. The Jags in 2023 allow the 4th most passing yards per game and the 10th most points to fantasy wide receivers at 38 a clip. And this should be a very competitive game between these division rivals, kind of fighting for that division title. This is going to be a good one to watch. All right, the 9th player that is going to dominate. You got to keep riding the hot hand until it cools off. Gus Edwards at the Chargers. Gus has been on a tear in these last 5 games. There is few running backs you would have rather had in these last 5 weeks. A touchdown in every game and 9 total touchdowns in 5 games. The RB2 in the last 5 weeks. And now he gets to play the Chargers, who in 2023 give up the 8th most points to opposing offenses and the 3rd most points to fantasy running backs at 27 PPR points a clip. Start Gus Edwards. Let's follow that hot streak. And the last player we're going to talk about, Justin Fields is back, and it is good news for DJ Moore. We're going to start him with confidence against the Vikings, the opposite side of Josh Dobbs on Monday Night Football. All year, this is kind of how we've started to handle the DJ Moore situation, okay? It's kind of a quiz. Okay. Is Justin Fields playing? If yes, start DJ Moore. Is Justin Fields not playing? Then do not start DJ Moore. Check this out. Shout out to RotoViz for these splits. But on the left side, you will see DJ Moore's numbers this year with Justin Fields. And on the right side, you will see his numbers without Justin Fields. 7 games with Justin Fields, averaging over 20 PPR points per game and almost 100 receiving yards per game. Now, I was told in the offseason that Justin Fields couldn't support a fantasy wide receiver. Here we are. I'm not so sure that's the case anymore, is it? And now he gets to play the Vikings, a great matchup, giving up the 9th most points to fantasy wide receivers. We're starting DJ Moore with confidence this week. But those are some names that you should start with the most confidence. Hopefully you've had a good weekend, with your family, with your friends, celebrating a holiday, and you're ready to get a crucial win as we're getting closer and closer to the playoffs. Do me a massive favor, smash the like button. Let me know what you're doing in the comments below. And if you see a comment, scroll through them, guys. Try and help some people out. We can only answer so many, but we will see you guys very soon. Go get a win. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy. Even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.